back to Betty. I'm your host, Cynthia Thompson. I don't know about you, but I've often wondered, what's the real story behind the city of Charlotte? What really happened here before Charlotte became this big city that it is right now? Do you know at one time Charlotte was called Charlottetown? Well, today you're going to learn even more about the city of Charlotte. My guest is a historian here in Charlotte, and his name is Dr. Tom Henchett. Thank you for joining me, Tom.
Great to be here.
So, Tom, Charlotte, when you hear someone ask you, what is the real story behind Charlotte? What are some of the things that you tell them?
Well, one of the things that everybody wants to know is why Charlotte is the Queen City.
Yeah.
A lot of folks don't know that, and the answer is that we're named after the Queen of England, which tells you that this city has been around longer than the United States, because once the United States happened, we didn't want to name anything after the Queen of England.
That's true.
And it's back before the Revolution. This was a little Indian crossroads, and they wanted to have a courthouse, so it would be the county seat. So people would come here when they bought and sold land, and they'd have a market on Saturday, and they didn't have cable TV to watch people fight. So they'd come down to the courthouse and have a good time, you know, at entertainment there. And to get a courthouse, they needed the king to pay attention to him. So they named the city after his wife, Queen Charlotte, wife of King George III. She was from Mecklenburg in Germany, so they named the county Mecklenburg. That's how we got that name. And the guy who actually made the decision was Governor William Tryon. And that's how we got Tryon Street.
Tryon Street. You know, I've often wondered where those street names came from. But we're going to talk about that later. Let's talk about some more about the history of Charlotte whenever it first started with Queen Charlotte here. What do you think drew those immigrants here to move to Charlottetown or Charlotte?
Well, the land here, I think, was good for farming. There were not good rivers. That's one of the reasons why we're 10 miles from the Catawba River, was it was so rocky. It's not like areas where the city's right on the river. But folks here, a lot of them were Scots-Irish Presbyterians, came because they did not actually really like the king. They didn't want him telling, you know, what religion they should have or whatever. And so they came and set up Presbyterian churches. My favorite church is the one that confuses everybody, Sharon Church. You ever been lost on Sharon Road?
Sharon, which Sharon Road?
Which Sharon Road? Well, the Sharon Road is named for the Sharon Presbyterian Church, which was named for a place in the Bible. If you look in the book of Isaiah, it talks about the plains of, I think Sharon is the way they pronounce it in Israel today, but it was a real place. But in the Bible, in the book of Isaiah, it says that if you're a believer and you're a farmer and you go to this place, your cattle will find water and your crops will grow. And so that church was planted 200 years ago, and the name indicated that these were farm people. That folks came here because the land was good and their crops would grow and their cattle would find water.
So what was one of the major crops here in Charlotte around the Civil War?
What you might expect would be cotton. And cotton was grown here, but it really wasn't until after the Civil War that this area took off as a cotton growing area, because the railroads came. Before that, the cotton plantation areas were down around Charleston. And that's where the rivers were good, and that's why Charleston is such a big, old, beautiful city, because of the wealth that came out of all the people that worked in the cotton fields built Charleston. But up here, people grew a little bit of everything. So they grew a little bit of wheat, they grew a little bit of cotton, probably grew a little bit of tobacco, I don't know. But then when the railroads came in the 1850s and slavery was wiped out and Charleston kind of went into decline, that's when Charlotte really takes off. Charlotte's really a New South city.
Oh, really?
A city from after the Civil War.
So, you know, a lot of neighborhoods have names like Myers Park, Dilworth, Noda. Where do people live if we could draw a map of a neighborhood today? Does that make sense?
Where were people back then?
Yeah.
Back before the Civil War, actually before 1900, the whole city was within what's now the I-277 expressway loop. That was all of Charlotte. And it isn't until Dilworth got started in the 1890s, they ran a streetcar, a trolley car, out into the farmland, and Dilworth was the first suburb. Can you imagine Dilworth being way out beyond the edge of town? But it was. So folks lived in what's now the business district downtown.
You know, Tom, we've been talking a lot about Charlotte. Let's take a quick break, and when we come back, I want you to tell me if we really had a Declaration of Independence, okay?
All right.
All right.
Coming home can be hard if you're a veteran of Iraq or Afghanistan. You may feel like you're all alone, but you're not alone. At IAVA.org, your fellow vets are all around you. Join our free online community, get the resources you need, and connect to other vets who know where you're coming from. IAVA.org. We've got your back.
Welcome back to Betty. I'm your host, Cynthia Thompson. I'm here with Tom, and he's a historian at the Levine Museum of the New South. Now, Tom, before I went on break, I've heard all these stories about the Declaration of Independence here in Charlotte, well, Mecklenburg County. Is that really true?
Most historians would say no. But there really was something where we said we weren't going to pay attention to the king anymore. The way the story goes, well, 1776, that's when on 4th of July people signed the Declaration of Independence in Philadelphia. And so 1776 is usually the starting point when people talk about this Declaration of Independence, this notion that we were no longer going to be part of England. But in reality, a number of communities around the colonies were edging towards it beforehand. And Mecklenburg was one of them.
Really?
And almost a little over a year earlier, in May of 1775, leaders here in Mecklenburg County got together and they drew up something, and they signed it. And the thing that we know they drew up was something called the Mecklenburg Resolves. And the Mecklenburg Resolves said that the authority of the king and crown was null and void. Those were the actual words. And we know that because it was published in newspapers around the South. There wasn't a newspaper in Charlotte yet. Charlotte was too little. But in some of the newspapers in the eastern part of North Carolina and a couple other places, the Mecklenburg Resolves show up. May 31st, the authority of the king and crown is null and void. Well, fast forward almost 50 years, and people were looking back at this revolutionary time, and people remembered that our forefathers, they signed something back then, and they asked the old guys, yeah, we did sign something. It said we were independent of the king and the crown. And no one ever found a copy of what it was they signed.
Oh, really?
It was never published anywhere. And what a number of historians think is that they just did not remember whether they'd done something on May the 20th, which is when they eventually said, yeah, I think it was a Declaration of Independence, and we signed it on May 20th. So that's the story that has come down to us, is a Mecklenburg Declaration of Independence on May 20th. But like I say, historians want proof. And I can't imagine a declaration where people didn't tell folks and put it in the newspaper. So, but that, to me, that doesn't matter a great deal, because it means that this area, whether it was a declaration on May the 20th or it was resolves on May the 31st, this was an area of independent-minded people, and they did not want to be part of England anymore. And when the revolution came, they fought as hard as anybody in the new United States.
So that's a good history lesson. Let's switch gears a little bit. What happened in the early 1900s to change the city of Charlotte?
Well, the city started really to take off in this New South period after the Civil War. The Old South is the South of slavery times. It's the South before the Civil War. At the end of the Civil War, the South had to reinvent itself. Slavery was gone. The South had to reinvent its economy. It had to reinvent its society. And basically, we've never stopped reinventing. We keep remaking ourselves every few years. And in the years right after the Civil War, they said, we want cities. This had been, Charlotte had about 2,000 people at the end of the Civil War. And they said, we want to be a sure enough city. The railroad had just come, and we want to be a place of factories. Back before the Civil War, the South was the part of the United States that grew things. After the Civil War, the South starts to say, we're going to make things. And they begin to build cotton mills. A lot of the early industry of Charlotte is cotton mills, taking that cotton that's coming up out of the ground and turning it into cloth. And so Charlotte begins slowly to grow in the years after the Civil War, and by 1900 it had about 20,000 people. So
really?
From 2,000 to 20,000 in a space of about 40 years. That was a pretty big amount of growth.
And with that growth, did the city start spreading out? What did they do to accommodate all those people?
The city indeed started spreading out. There had been a little bit beyond that I-277 loop. That was pretty much, the interstate wasn't there back then, but that was pretty much the edge of town. Johnson C. Smith University, what was called Biddle Institute, had been built on that hilltop up on the west side back in the 1880s, that building dates from. But the notion that folks would want to live at the edge of the city and commute in, which we now take for granted, that happens when the trolley comes, when the streetcar starts running down the middle of the road on the rails and takes you out to Dilworth or out to Elizabeth or out to Myers Park or out to Wesley Heights or up into the mill village of Noda.
We really had streetcars?
We had streetcars that went all over the city. You could get on at Johnson C. Smith University. In fact, you could get on right where the Excelsior Club is. Folks remember that corner of Oak Lawn and Beatty's Ford Road is the end. Older people told me that when I first came to Charlotte years ago, because that was the end of the trolley line. And you could get on there and ride past Johnson C. Smith and down Trade Street past what's now the Mosaic Village and into the area where Johnson and Wales is, and all the way clear across town past Central Piedmont Community College up to Presbyterian Hospital, and then you would turn right or turn left. If you turned right, you'd go all the way out to the Myers Park Country Club.
I know.
And that was just one line.
I know that they're kind of arguing about the streetcar, building it again. Do you think building it is a good idea, in your opinion?
I'm a historian. I'm just tickled about what other people do. But I can tell you historically that having that connection is something that helps people see the connection. I think right now, if you ask people about Central Piedmont Community College, they know it's in the center city someplace. If you ask them about Johnson and Wales, they know it's in the center city someplace. Ask them about Johnson C. Smith University, well, maybe that's near the center city someplace. And to realize that all of them would be in a 15-minute ride on that trolley car, that changes the way you think about Charlotte.
So those tracks, are they still down or are they dug up?
The tracks, the last trolley ran in 1938, which is a long time ago. Some of the tracks were pulled up to provide scrap metal for World War II, and then the rest of them, as they repave and dig up streets and stuff. So you can't go back with the old rails. But if you go up by Central Piedmont Community College, they put some new rails down. And the hope on the part of some folks is that those will extend once again all the way to Johnson C. Smith.
Let's take a quick break because I'm at a loss of words for all this information I'm hearing about Charlotte. I had no idea was here. And when I come back, we're going to talk about the gold rush here in Charlotte.
Excellent.
Okay?
Any questions?
What kind of service plan does this come with?
Unlimited.
Can I keep my same phone number?
Absolutely.
How do I change the ringtone?
Just hook it up to your computer.
Does it have a camera? What's the warranty? Does it come in silver? Can I put my party shuffle on this? Does it have a 3.5 millimeter headset jack? You sell a lot of these?
It's the one I carry.
You ever get those phantom vibrations in your pocket?
Any questions?
No.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
Ask questions. For the 10 questions everyone should know, go to ahrq.gov.
Hi, welcome back to Betty. I'm your host, Cynthia Thompson. I'm here with Tom, and we're talking about the history of Charlotte. And before we went on break, I've been told that there was gold here in Charlotte. Is that true?
Oh, yeah.
Really?
Yep. Probably under your yard.
Little pieces or big pieces?
The initial thing there was a gold rush here before California. And what happened was if you go out Albemarle Road about 25 miles, you'll see signs, brown state markers for the Reed Gold Mine. And Conrad Reed was a little kid. He was out playing in a creek one day, and he found a 17-pound rock that glittered. And he took it home to his parents. And he said, "Mommy and Daddy, this is gold." And they said, "No, son, it's not." Because people had been looking for gold here in North America ever since Columbus came. And they had never, ever, anywhere found gold. But Conrad Reed's piece of rock, well, they used it as a doorstop. And one day a jeweler came along and offered him, I think, $3.50 for it. And that was the beginning of the gold rush. And there really was, maybe not a gold rush, but a gold trickle kind of here. And people did come from all over the United States. People came from Europe. That's how the Mint happened. If you go downtown, there's Mint Street. That's where the Mint originally stood. And the Mint was the building where they melted down the gold and made it into coins. And so the United States Mint opened, I think, in 1837 and continued to function until the California Gold Rush of 1849. California had much better gold deposits than we did. But there was little bits of gold all throughout the Carolinas. When they were digging for the Bank of America Corporate Center in Center City, they found little traces of gold.
They did?
I've been out to the Reed Gold Mine, and I would recommend anybody to go out there because they will let you pan for gold. And I found a little tiny speck of gold.
Well, how much is that worth? Not a whole lot.
It was a great story. I got my money's worth out of the story.
So tell me, now Charlotte, you said it's a growing city. What store is famous for Charlotte?
What store is famous for Charlotte? Are you thinking about Belk? There you go.
What's the story behind the Belk stores?
Well, the Belk department store chain, if you're new to the South, you may not know that there are Belk stores all over the South. It's one of the ways you know you're in the South, because you see a Belk store. And they started back at the end of the 19th century in Monroe, North Carolina. But they came up here as quick as they could because this is where the farmers would bring their cotton, sell it. It would go up on the railroad up to the mills in New England and then eventually the mills in the South. But folks would have money in their overalls after they sold their cotton. And the original Charlotte Belk store was on East Trade Street, right across from where the epicenter is. Where the epicenter is where the trains came in, and that's where you would sell your cotton.
Oh, really?
And across the street, of course, that's where you wanted to be when they had the little money jingling in the overalls.
Where they go shop, huh?
Yeah, yeah.
You know, Charlotte is a growing city. What are some other businesses that are known to have started in Charlotte?
Charlotte has been a real incubator for business innovation. And probably the most important business is Bank of America.
Right.
Bank of America, if you've been around Charlotte for a while, you can remember it was Nations Bank for a while. You can remember it was NCNB for a while. If you've been here a long time, you remember that NCNB was North Carolina National Bank.
Right, I remember that.
And that came out of a couple of local banks that merged. But what happened in the 1980s was Hugh McCall, who was working at Bank of America, put together a team, and he said, we now know how to run a branch system. We now know, because of ATMs, how to run a computer system. We could run a really big bank. But there were state laws in every state that said you could only bank within that state.
Oh, really?
And Mr. McCall put together a team of legal people and banking people, and they found a bank down in Lake City, Florida, that they could legally buy. And that was the beginning of interstate banking in the United States.
So did Charlotte start that?
Charlotte started that.
I did not know that.
And that was NCNB. Mr. McCall started buying banks. His rival down the street, Edge Crutchfield at First Union, started buying banks. And pretty soon you had Bank of America. Hugh McCall had bought up the original Bank of America in San Francisco, moved the headquarters here. Mr. Crutchfield bought Wachovia in Winston-Salem, had a major regional bank all up and down the eastern United States, which is now a big part of the Wells Fargo. So when you talk about important businesses, you got to mention Bank of America and Wachovia First Union.
You know, Hugh McCall, he's done a lot for the city too. What are some other things he's done for Charlotte?
Well, I think one of the things that is a legacy of his way of looking at the world is how strong a center city we have. You go to places like Atlanta, and there's a moment driving into Atlanta on I-85 where you can see this row of skyscrapers going for miles along, I think, Peachtree Street or something like that. And here we have, fewer tall buildings because we're a smaller city, but they're very compactly oriented, and that means that there's a lot of synergy. So if you come downtown for Levine Museum of the New South, and you want to go to the Beckler Museum of Art, or you want to go to the Imagine-On Children's Theater, or you want to go get on the light rail, it all works really well together. And so I think that that's something that Hugh McCall really wanted. He said, if we're going to build a national bank in this little bitty city, we got to build a big city. We got to build a city that's going to attract people who could go work in New York or could go work in India or something like that. And the amount of art and community kind of things that are in the center city, the fact that people are living in the center city along with the office development, the fact the light rail is there, and the basketball arena is there, and the football arena is there, all of that.
Everything.
That is a vision that I think Hugh McCall was at least part of.
You know, I want to ask you something. Let's back up a little bit. Charlotte Motor Speedway. What's the story behind that?
Well, you go fast and turn left, from what I understand. They haven't let me drive on it. I went out there to see a race one time, and they made me stay off the track. So
They wouldn't let you drive?
They wouldn't let me drive. So it's evidently a spectator sport. Yeah, NASCAR has deep roots here. The France family that started NASCAR is based in Florida and have been for a long time. But the first strictly stock race, which is the beginning of stock car racing as we know it, was in Charlotte in the late 40s. And Charlotte Motor Speedway is sort of in the middle of this whole circuit of tracks that makes it a really smart place to locate an engineering shop. If you're going to have a car, one car used to be, now it's dozens of cars, but if you're going to build those cars, it makes sense to build them and test them in Charlotte, and then Sunday you go out to whatever racetrack you're going to, and then you come back here to the sort of the hub of NASCAR, which is why the NASCAR Hall of Fame is here.
And which makes a lot of sense now that you've told me this story, because I didn't realize that Charlotte played such a big role in stock car racing. Before we close, I have so many more questions I want to ask you, but I do want to ask you, what do you see for the future for Charlotte?
I'm a historian. I don't predict the future. I'm trying to predict the past. But I see continued growth. Right now, that's our most recent history. A lot of folks, I think, thought that as banking began to change in the middle of the 2000s, as we ran into the Great Recession, that Charlotte would quit growing, and that has not happened. Since 2007, Charlotte is still, the last I saw, the 7th fastest growing city in the United States.
Really?
And that's because we're not just a banking city. Banks are important, but we're also the headquarters of Duke Energy. We've got, I think, 8 Fortune 500 companies, everything from Family Dollar to the largest steel maker in the United States, Nucor. Lowe's Home Improvement is headquartered here. So I hope the banking industry does well. I think that will benefit Charlotte. But if it doesn't, I think we're positioned to be a strong city because of our economic diversity and because of the diverse kind of people who are here, the many kinds of skills, the people who come from around the United States and around the world to be part of this place. I think that's what makes us a viable place for the future.
You know, I could sit here and ask you 100 more questions about Charlotte, because I think we learn so much about ourselves from our past, and it makes us who we are. I want to thank you so much for being on my show. You've got to come back.
Thank you.
You promise?
Love to.
You will?
Thank you so much.
And I want to thank each and every one of you for watching our show, Better You, here on Public Access 21 every Wednesday night at 6 p.m. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Oh my